The show that explores the fascinating secret life of the world around us. Revealing surprising facts guaranteed to make you say, I didn't know that. Meet Richard Ambrose and Johnny Phillips. Two industrial scientists who don't mind getting their hands dirty when it comes to establishing the facts. Join them on their mission to explore the extraordinary behind the ordinary. In this special one-hour edition of I Didn't Know That, we reveal the surprising stories and amazing facts behind going green. Coming up, Richard and Johnny drag race the latest crop of green motors. Hit the beach in a quest for power.
Disaster strikes!
Attempt to run a home cinema by riding bicycles. Meet the green goddess who can shave hundreds of pounds off your electricity bills. And oops, have we blown up the boys in an attempt to build the ultimate eco-shed? All this and more in this special do-it-yourself green edition of I Didn't Know That.
Hey, Rich. Have you noticed lately that people just seem to have one thing on their mind all the time?
Oh, yes.
No, not that. This.
From politicians to film stars, from big business to the man in the street. These days, everybody wants to be seen to be green.
It seems the world's finally woken up to one simple fact. We're using the planet's resources at a frightening rate.
Johnny, get up! We're late! It's coming!
This is just some of the stuff the average person in the UK gets through every year, and it's arriving on our doorstep right now. What a day for it.
Here in the UK, our annual steel consumption equates to about a third of a tonne each, and that's used for construction, building bridges, right down to everyday things like cutlery.
And there's more. Nearly a tonne of coal. It's used mainly in power stations, but a little bit goes on your domestic fires.
And that's not the end of it. Oil usage equals about 1,700 litres each for running our engines, heating and lubrication.
And there's wood. Nearly a third of a tonne. Mainly used in construction, paper, some on furniture.
We could also mention the 1.5 million litres of natural gas that we all individually get through every year. These are just some of the raw materials that keep our modern consumer society running. And remember, these figures are for each and every person living in the UK. To get an idea of national consumption, you need to multiply by around 60 million. Now, you don't have to be a fully paid-up, tree-hugging eco-warrior to realise this level of consumption can't go on, particularly when so much of it goes straight in the bin. Every year in the UK, we throw away over 30 million tonnes of domestic waste. That's over a tonne of rubbish for every home in the country.
Firstly, who on earth has a bin that big?
And secondly, where does all that waste go?
60% of that waste still ends up in landfills. This site in the Midlands is one of 4,000 working landfills across the country. And amazingly, even though it covers over 130 acres, it's still considered small. The site typically receives over 500 lorries a week. That's around 10,000 tonnes of waste just dumped in a hole in the ground.
In the past, there appears to have been virtually no restrictions on what you could dump.
At other sites across the country, people have found everything from radioactive waste to Maggie Thatcher's medical records. Oh, dear me, I didn't know that. Not to mention the odd unexploded bomb.
Of course, things are much better controlled now. Nevertheless, these holes are still filling up at an alarming rate.
This site is by a huge clay quarry, and as the clay is dug out for making bricks, it's replaced by lorry loads of rubbish.
These machines then compact the waste, level it and cover it with soil on a daily basis. And believe it or not, this whole depression behind me will be filled to the level of that bank within a matter of months.
As it piles up and up, billions upon billions of microorganisms start breaking it down.
This decomposition, combined with rainwater seeping down through the rotting rubbish, produces two things. The first is a nasty liquid called leachate, which needs to be pumped out and cleaned up at a water purification plant. The second is methane.
Here's a small demonstration to show you just how dangerous methane is and why we need to be so careful with it.
What we've got here is a canister of 100% methane attached to this funnel in which we've got some detergent and water. Now what we're going to do is bubble the methane through the liquid, and what we'll get is a nice frothy head which Richard is then going to light.
Hey!
And that's why you don't want large amounts of this explosive gas building up in the landfill. However, once you've sucked it out safely, it can be very useful.
Here at this old landfill site, boreholes are drilled down into the decomposing rubbish, and the methane is extracted by drawing it out through a series of underground pipes.
The methane is then fed through that pipe to a V20 engine where it combusts at a temperature of over 1,000 degrees Celsius.
And as a result, it produces 1 megawatt of electricity every hour, which is enough to power 2,000 homes.
Of course, landfills aren't the only things to produce methane. One of the largest producers of this explosive gas is farm animals. And when you're talking globally, 1.5 billion head of cattle, woo, and 1.7 billion sheep is a big problem. In fact, it's claimed that farm animals are responsible for producing nearly 1/5 of the greenhouse gases that cause global warming.
And because of this problem, scientists are working on a new type of feed, a cleaner burning fuel, as it were. It's early days, but they're hoping to reduce these emissions by up to 70%. Want some?
OK, you're probably thinking you know a few people who could benefit from that feed. Don't we all? But you'd be wrong, because the human digestive system works in a totally different way, and even someone like Johnny produces just a fraction of the methane a cow does.
And even though there are over 6 billion of us on the planet, human-produced methane isn't considered a significant factor in global warming.
Still to come, the boys test 4 of the latest green cars to find out which is the quickest and which can travel the furthest on a pound of fuel.
Oh, come on!
Richard gets all hung up in a mobile phone recycling plant. Johnny gets up close and personal with a solar panel. And the boys' eco-shed challenge goes disastrously wrong. In this special 1-hour edition of I Didn't Know That, we're revealing the surprising stories and amazing facts behind going green. Already we've seen how we're consuming the world's resources at a frightening rate, and how much of what we consume ends up in a hole in the ground. But potentially some of the biggest do-it-yourself savings are to be made in the home. So we're sending the lads to visit 2 very different eco-communities. Johnny's going to Shropshire to see some modern award-winning houses, while Richard's heading to the very edge of Britain to gain inspiration from our distant past.
Now, apart from the windows and the odd solar panel, this type of dwelling wouldn't look out of place in the Middle Ages. The main structure's built out of wood, with mud, straw and horse dung being used for the walls. The roof is made up of 150 straw bales supported by wooden poles and topped off with turf to weatherproof it. This is green living in the extreme, and while I like the idea, it's probably a bit hardcore for most people's taste.
On the other hand, this is more like it. And it shows you can have an eco-home without dropping out of the modern world. Each one of these houses is built from sustainable materials that are sourced as locally as possible. They all get triple glazing, extra thick, heavily insulated walls, and south-facing glass atriums to soak up the sun's heat. With all this insulation and triple glazing, these houses are remarkably well sealed. Now, you might think this would make them a bit stuffy, but the designers thought of this, and they have a system which replaces the air on a regular basis and uses the heat from the old stuffy air to heat up the fresh air on the way in. And as an added bonus, the air's filtered, which means there's a lot less dust, and therefore a lot less dusting to do. It's brilliant. But the most impressive thing about this development is that it's a commercial concern. The houses cost up to 25% more than traditional builds, but the developers have discovered that there's no shortage of people who want to own one.
Having been on our journeys of enlightenment, Johnny and I are now inspired to build our own pads, but we've only got one day. We're talking small scale, we're talking sheds.
And just to make it interesting, we're going to make it competitive. Richard will be concentrating on the low technology end of the spectrum, whereas I will be using all the latest gadgets. And we're going to turn these two sheds into dwellings fit for any eco-warrior.
I'm smelling victory, mate.
I'm smelling horse manure. First things first, I need power, so I'm going to install this 13-watt photovoltaic panel on the roof of my shed, and that's going to charge that 12-volt battery and hopefully provide me with all the power I need.
Of course, if you want something for your own home, a typical system producing enough power to run a 2-bar electric fire will cost over £10,000, but you might be entitled to a grant.
I'm going to turf my roof because good thick turf offers great thermal insulation. But because it also retains a little bit of moisture, I'm using a waterproof membrane directly onto the roof. This is brilliant. It looks great and also allows nature to creep in there so I can grow with it. It's fantastic.
Now, we've given the lads just a day to get these sheds knocked into shape, so the pressure's on.
Right, I'm having these now.
Richard gets off to a flying start. And Johnny's getting into solar panels in a big way. The latest addition to his roof is a rather nifty solar-powered shed light.
For interior insulation, I'm using bales of straw. It's going to be cosy!
And I'm using wool, and lots of it.
Insulating your home can be one of the most effective ways to save energy. You can insulate a loft in a 3-bedroomed house for as little as £270, and that should cut your bills by around £200 a year.
Building houses with straw dates back for ages, and with bales it's so much easier. They're so light, they're like bricks, they're cheap, and they're really warm. Maybe the 3 little pigs did get it wrong.
Although straw bales offer great insulation, they do take up rather a lot of room, which is a bit of a disadvantage in a tiny shed. Johnny's wool, on the other hand, offers effective insulation in a very dense package.
This stuff is 100% natural, it's made of wool, it's slightly more than fiberglass, but it's just as good at insulating and it's much nicer to work with.
Richard and Johnny have got a fair amount of work to do here, so for now we're going to leave them to it. We've already seen how farm animals pump out a surprisingly large amount of the world's greenhouse gases. But for many people, there's a more obvious villain.
Ever since the days when you had to have someone running in front of them waving a red flag, cars have been on the receiving end of a lot of anger and criticism. But more recently, manufacturers have been putting a lot of effort into making cars more environmentally friendly, more recyclable and less polluting.
We're going to take a look at the current crop of so-called greener vehicles and see how they stack up. First up is this, the G-Whiz. It's an electric car, so when the car's running, it produces 0 emissions, and that means 0 pollution.
Electric cars have been around for decades, but as battery technology has improved, so has their efficiency.
The really great thing about this car is it's kind on your wallet. You don't pay road tax and one charge overnight, and it's great for a run round town the next day.
On the downside, much of the electricity they use still comes from burning fossil fuels, but overall, they do have a smaller carbon footprint than their petrol equivalents.
The hybrid car has been with us for a while now, and Honda in particular have invested a lot in systems that combine the best of petrol and electric engines.
This car has 2 engines, a petrol one which runs on unleaded fuel and an electric one powered by batteries. These 2 engines work together to reduce emissions.
This might look like an old Mercedes diesel, and that's because it is an old Mercedes diesel. But rather than using conventional fuel, we'll be testing its performance using bog-standard vegetable oil.
This isn't that surprising because the first ever diesel engine, invented by Dr. Diesel, was designed to run on peanut oil, not just the stuff you find at the pumps.
Now, any family diesel can run on vegetable oil, but you might need a modification. It'd be worth checking.
However, be warned, as soon as you put vegetable oil into your tank, it becomes classified as a motor fuel. And for every litre you burn, you're supposed to send off 27.1 pence to the taxman.
A more government-friendly biofuel, i.e. one that they can tax at the pump, is bioethanol, which can be used in this brand new Saab.
Bioethanol is produced from fermenting sugars in a wide variety of crops and, as such, is renewable and potentially carbon neutral.
But which of these cars is your best bet? Well, we're going to try and find out by putting them through their paces with a couple of tests.
The first trial is a 400-metre dash straight down this track here to see how they perform on a sprint start. Now, we've got 4 cars and there's only 2 of us, so we've invited our naughty twin brothers along.
Come on, lads, and behave yourselves. Remember, you're on television. As if we would. He's always telling me what to do. I can't stand it. I really can't.
We're keen to test the car's performance, even though drag racing isn't the most eco-friendly way of driving.
I'm really looking forward to this. I love beating Johnny. He hates it. Come on.
Come on!
The bioethanol Saab with its 2.3-litre engine streaks away.
Now they are herring off.
And the ancient Merc puts up a good show until the hybrid's petrol engine kicks in.
Oh, come on! The bioethanol and the hybrid have flown away.
As for the electric car, it's not going to be frightening Ferraris anytime soon. But this result was pretty much as expected, because electric car engines generally don't produce that much power. The Mercedes ran a bit quicker on vegetable oil, as it's cleaner than diesel, but it's still a sluggish old thing. By using both engines at the same time, the hybrid is less reliant on its petrol engine and so uses less fuel and therefore produces less emissions. Basically, it's more green than go. So, for the boy or girl racer looking for an alternatively powered vehicle, high-octane bioethanol is the way to go.
So that was conclusive. It doesn't exactly whiz. Now, the second trial is endurance. We're going to test these cars to see how far they'll travel at constant speed with just £1 worth of fuel. I've been charging this now, it's fully charged, and even on a green tariff, I get change.
Although the hybrid car has a big battery to assist it, it still runs on unleaded petrol, so I got just a smidge over a litre of fuel for my pound.
For the veggie diesel, our pound also buys just over a litre of oil. Bioethanol is slightly cheaper than unleaded, but only slightly, so once again we get just over a litre to play with. In this test, we're looking for stamina over speed, so they all set off at a steady 50 kilometres per hour.
Now, the endurance test is perfect for this car. We'll just wear these guys down, and I think we're going to win.
For the first 15 minutes, it's evenly matched, but then...
I think, yeah, it's starting to feel a bit odd. Here we go.
Ah, the Saab looks in trouble.
The bioethanol Saab is the first to bite the dust. Its large, powerful engine is just too thirsty, and the lovable veggie Merc doesn't fare much better.
Oh, no, here we go. That's it. End of the road for the Merc.
While the cars powered by bioethanol and veg oil conk out at around 12 kilometres, the hybrid and the electric car just keep going. But as we approach the 20k mark, the hybrid starts to play up.
Just over 19 kilometres, and oh dear, I think that's us done.
In the end, it's an overwhelming victory. The little electric car did 48 kilometres on a single charge, and that's over double the distance of the hybrid.
It might be slow, but it's steady. And in this trial, it's the winner. I'm going to go pick up the losers. Woohoo!
Power makes the world go round, and it's hard to imagine our modern society without it. But most of that power still comes from burning fossil fuels, which many people believe is a major contributor to global warming. So, what are the alternatives?
The biggest supply of sustainable power comes from that, the sun. And one way of harnessing its energy is by using these solar panels, and they can be as small and compact as this mobile phone charger, or you can get some serious whoppers.
This is the world's biggest solar power plant, and it's been built in Portugal. It's made up of 52,000 photovoltaic modules, covering an area the size of 145 football pitches. It cost £40 million to build, and it generates enough juice to supply 8,000 homes.
Now, we want to know what's inside them and how they work. Now, we've got a photovoltaic panel here.
And over here, a solar thermal panel.
And true to form, Johnny's going to cut them up with a grinder.
It's a little-known fact that Albert Einstein received his Nobel Prize not for the theory of relativity, but for the work he did on photoelectrics, the science behind solar panels. But it's only relatively recently that the technology has improved to the point where it's now viable to use solar panels for large-scale power production.
There we have it.
Nice cutting.
Sliced in two. What can we see?
Well, not a lot. This solar panel has 36 silicon cells which convert the sun's energy into electricity, but they're wafer thin and barely visible from the side. Oh. What you can see is the glass, which is there to protect the cells from the sun's radiation and indelicate handling.
Next up, the solar thermal panel. These are specifically designed to use the sun's energy to warm water at a much lower tech.
Good stuff.
So what have we got here? We've got a double-glazed, transparent layer made of some kind of plastic which lets the sunlight in.
You've got an air gap of about 20 to 30 mil, an aluminium plate painted black to absorb the heat.
Sandwiched between two of these aluminium layers is the pipework through which the water's circulated, absorbing the heat.
And all the energy is coming this way, so at the back you've got an insulation layer of silverback liner. It's brilliant, so it's going to get really warm on the inside.
And the water can be recirculated out of the panel to, for example, preheat the water in your hot water tank. It's brilliant.
Another very visible form of renewable energy is wind power. Britain is Europe's windiest country, and we don't mean Johnny. The UK's government is buying into wind power in a big way. They're planning to spend £1.5 billion building one of the world's biggest wind farms in the Thames estuary. It's all part of a plan to have 10% of the UK's energy needs supplied by renewable sources by 2010. And where there's wind, there's waves. And here too we can find power.
But how do you harness that power? Well, look no further. We're going to build ourselves our own wave power generator using this float, some construction material,
and more importantly, this tube, which has a coil of copper wire around the outside and a magnet inside. Now, as the magnet passes through the coil, it generates an electric current. So hopefully, when it's out there bobbing around, we're going to get a current flowing through the wire.
The two ends of the coil will be attached to this capacitor, which will hold the current to light this little LED. Watch this. And there it is, our very own wave power generator. Now it's time to test it.
Surf's up, dude. What are we waiting for?
Let's go! You said surf's up. It's not exactly Hawaii, man.
Well, granted, it's not the perfect storm, but I think you'll find that even in these conditions, there's a lot of energy in those little waves. We'll test it, and I think we'll find that out. Okay?
Show me.
Despite the minimal wave action, the buffeting the boys' machine got was enough to rock the magnet back and forth through the coil.
Yes! I think we've hit an energy-rich patch, Johnny.
Go.
And after just 40 moves, Richard and Johnny decided to test it.
Disaster strikes! Oh no, the brave new world is no more.
Will it work? Will it work?
Okay, Rich, the moment of truth. Has the capacitor stored enough energy to light our bulb? Would you like to make contact?
Light!
Hey!
It works!
There you go.
Now just imagine the amount of power we could harness if we scaled this up massively.
This is how the professionals do it with a full-size wave power generator. It's on the Isle of Islay in Scotland. It's called the Limpet, and it uses the movement of the sea to push air into and suck air out of a large pipe to drive a turbine. Others resist the motion of the ocean using hydraulic rams to create power. In theory, waves could provide the world's energy many times over, so there's huge potential in this technology. Still to come, Richard and Johnny attempt to spin up a home movie using pedal power. We go behind the paper, glass and iron curtain into the hidden world of recycling. And after building 2 eco-sheds, far from saving the planet, they nearly blow it up. After a slow start, Richard and Johnny's do-it-yourself eco-sheds are coming together. And believe me, Richard isn't afraid of getting his hands dirty to win this challenge.
What more can a man want? I've got my little shelf, I've got my seat, and I've got my window view. The only thing I do need is manure. So to seal the straw, what I'm going to use is a plaster. Now, traditionally, this is either a clay or a lime-based plaster, but you can also mix in manure. Might be nasty, but it's going to be effective, and that's what I care about, to be honest. It's not so much like mucking out, this is mucking in.
Lime plaster was traditionally used because it allows the straw to breathe, which stops it rotting. The animal dung was merely added to give the plaster a bit of texture and to bulk it out. After all, while it doesn't grow on trees, it certainly drops out of the back of horses.
Now, it's all very well putting in insulation, but if you haven't got the right windows, it's a bit of a waste of time. So I am going to put double glazing in my shed.
Poorly insulated single-pane windows can account for up to 20% of the heat loss in a house, so double glazing is the way to go.
Well, it needs a little bit of tweaking. But I tell you what, I've done such a good job on this. I think I might even be too warm in there.
That's it. That's the plastering done. That is hard work. It's a bit rough and ready, but it'll do. I've got 3 more things to do. I've got a picture to put up, curtains, but most importantly, my wood fire. Now, Johnny, it's heavy. Can you give us a hand?
Can you get a bigger one?
Hey, I'm going to be roasty toasty.
Wood-burning stoves are making a bit of a comeback.
Hello!
Because wood taken from sustainable sources is now considered green. It's also carbon neutral, and many of the latest stoves burn much cleaner than the old smokers.
And voila.
While Richard has his stove, Johnny is relying on the sun's heat to warm up his south-facing shed and the heavy insulation to keep the heat in overnight.
Happy days.
Johnny's got some double glazing over there. I'm using blackout blinds, nice and thick.
The sun's setting. It's time to get cosy by the fire.
Night-night, Johnny boy.
Sleep tight, Ricky.
We'll let them have a little kip before coming back later to declare the winner of this first ever Eco-Shed Challenge. Whether you live in a mud hut or a mansion, there's no excuse for wasting power. So we've invited green lifestyle guru Joanna Yarrow to give us some advice on what the typical household can do to reduce its electricity bills.
Come, Joanna.
Thank you.
Richard, this is Joanna.
Hello.
Good to
nice
meet you.
Hi.
Welcome to our humble abode. What do you think?
Not as green as it could be, I don't think.
Oh.
Number 1, here, your heating. 25 degrees. Turn that down to 20 straight away. Every degree that you turn it down will cut your heating bill by 10%.
Wow.
How many bulbs have you got in here?
A lot.
What I'd like you to do is switch each of those straight away to a low-energy bulb because they'll use about a fifth of the energy, last 12 times as long. Every year, each bulb will save you about £10.
Throwing money away.
You are £100 during the course of lifetime of each of those bulbs you're wasting.
Oh, I can't believe this.
And another thing, these little red lights here. Appliances on standby, they will be using up to 85% of the energy as if they were just left switched on. So turn them all off properly. And if everyone in Britain did that, we'd save enough energy to power all the street lights in Britain. Right, kitchen. This can be the most energy-hungry part of the house because you've got so many gadgets in here. And some of the big guzzlers are your fridge freezer and your washer and tumble dryer. -21 for your freezer. It doesn't need to be that cold.
No.
Other thing is, pull it out from the wall a bit so that the heat at the back has got room to escape and it won't have to work so hard. And another thing you could try is a gadget called a saver plug, which you basically plug into the wall, plug the fridge into that, and it'll only let as much energy through as the fridge actually needs at that moment. Now, there's one thing that you could use to keep an eye on all your energy use. It's something like this. This is a smart meter, and what this does is it measures the amount of electricity you're using at any time in your home, and it shows you how many pence per hour you're spending. So, at the moment, you're spending nearly 20 pence an hour on electricity.
Now, that's nifty.
So if you want to understand where all your energy is going in the house and why your bills are so high, you can go around and turn things on and off, and this will show you what's going on behind your back.
So we just had to put this gadget to the test. First, we switched everything off, with the exception of the boiler and the freezer. And as it turns out, these two appliances alone are costing us 2.3 pence an hour. Next, we switched on the plugs to the DVD, the TV, the VHS and the hi-fi. And even on standby, this added nearly a penny an hour to our bill. This might not sound like much, but 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, this adds up to over £80 worth of electricity.
Turning on the TV adds another 3 pence. But the big killer in the lounge is the spots. These cost a whopping 4 pence an hour. And when they're on for an average of 4 hours a day, every day, that's nearly £60 a year. Add the kitchen lights, and we're looking at spending over £120 a year on downstairs lighting alone.
Now, this is only a small sample of the electrical appliances we use every day, but it does clearly show where the money's going. And once you know that, it's easy to make the changes that count.
Earlier, we saw how the vast bulk of our waste still goes into landfills. And when we're throwing away over a ton of rubbish per household per year, this situation really can't go on.
And is there a better way? Well, for some kinds of waste, there most definitely is. The answer, of course, is recycling.
This recycling plant in the south of England handles around 160,000 tonnes of trash each year. And here, they even sort your recyclable waste for you. And this is how they do it. Paper and plastics are separated using air jets to push them off the conveyor. Optical scanners help pick the cardboard from the paper. And the tin cans are whipped up off the line using very powerful magnets. And to keep their target of 99% accuracy, there's no beating the human eye. Once the waste is sorted, it's carried off to processors where it's remade. Paper can be recycled up to 6 times, then the fibres become too short and weak. But for each tonne of paper we recycle, we save 30,000 litres of water. The cans are carted off to be melted down and reformed to start a new life as bicycles, girders or cans of dog food. In fact, a quarter of every new can is part of an old one. Glass can be recycled repeatedly because the structure doesn't deteriorate. But there's a surplus of green glass in our waste because we import so many green bottles. Wonder what's in them.
And do you know what one of the hardest things to recycle is? The mobile phone.
And if your kitchen drawer is anything like ours, with tape and matches and old raw plugs, you might have a pair of old bricks in there too.
In fact, it's been estimated that there are tens of millions of unwanted mobiles lying around in the nation's drawers, and that is a big problem.
The reason why they're so difficult to recycle is the complexity and diversity of their designs. But fortunately, there are people out there who are prepared to make the effort.
Many of the mobile phones that do manage to escape our kitchen drawers end up here at PhoneBack, this massive recycling centre in East London.
They're collected from over 10,000 free collection points all over Europe.
And since 2002, they've processed over 6 million phones. Isn't that yours?
I think it is, yeah. Oh, no.
Oh, dear. I'll tell you what, just catch up with me when you found it, OK? Give me a shout.
Mate, yeah, cheers. Oh.
The handsets are processed and then sorted to see if they can be reused or recycled. And after testing, about 70% of them are refurbished, ready for resale. Many of these phones will have been sent in on behalf of charities, which receive £5 for each phone that's reused.
Since these bricks first appeared in the 1980s, mobile phone use has increased massively. It's been estimated that there are over 2.5 billion mobile phone users worldwide.
And when there are so many phones in use today, it makes perfect sense to recycle them, especially when the typical phone contains about 16% high-value goods like silver, gold, platinum and palladium.
Some of the plastics are also recycled to produce buckets and traffic cones, and any waste is incinerated in a process that produces very low emissions. In addition, lithium, nickel and cadmium are extracted from phone batteries and used in power tools and pharmaceuticals. But the best way to recycle a phone is to give it a second lease of life.
Now, we've got two mobile phones. They're very beaten up. They need a total refurbishment. They need a new battery, new screens, new casings. We've got Leszek, who's an expert at it, and Johnny, obviously, is a novice. We're going to see how hard it is. Let's go. Johnny gets his first. I'm not being biased. Leszek, yeah, yours is pretty broken there, mate.
Yeah,
go for it. I can see you've done this before.
I struggled initially just getting the case off, but really? I think I'm doing all right now.
Are you putting that screen on already? Yeah. Johnny, look, that's by example what we should be having in about the same time. Where are you then?
Well, look, he hasn't put it in his box yet. I've got time to catch up. Right, the screen's on.
The battery goes in there.
Job
Johnny,
done.
well done.
And it's finished. How did I do?
You did really well.
All right?
Leszek, did he do well?
Can I have a job?
So we've seen how mankind recycles materials, but nature has been doing it since, well, the year dot. All organic materials biodegradable, which means it will compost, and you can do this at home. Johnny, show them the worms.
Yep, we've got here a worm composter. Now, this first layer is basically a starting banquet for the worms, just something to get them going. Rich, bring on our little friends.
Bag of worms.
Now, at this point, you add the worms, which are going to be doing all the work for you.
The worms help to speed up the natural decomposing process and turn ordinary household rubbish into rich, dark plant food.
Banana skins, cabbage leaves, tea bags, that sort of stuff, and some paper to bulk it up.
Of course, this stuff would naturally biodegrade in landfills, but by composting it at home, you're saving the need for it to be collected and transported to the dump. Plus, you bag yourself free fertiliser.
There it is.
Beautiful, wormy compost. And food waste isn't the only stuff you can compost. If you're really into it, you can buy a composting toilet. Do you mind?
And although it's illegal to compost a corpse, you can choose a cardboard coffin, which is a more sustainable and biodegradable option. What's going on? Hold on. What are you doing?
Take him away.
Oi! Let me out! I'm not dead!
Back at the sheds, all the boys have to do now is sit back and enjoy the fruits of their labours.
Well, my shed's all finished. My solar-charged light's working brilliantly. I'm just settling down in front of the television, which is running off the battery I charged with a big solar panel, and the insulation's working a treat. It's really keeping in the heat that it absorbed earlier during the day. So, yeah, I'm just about to settle down for the night. I wonder how Rich is doing. I'm going to give him a call.
Right, mate?
Hello, Rich. How are you doing?
Oh, man, I've got a sweat on in here. It's lovely. How you doing?
Just about to settle down for a film.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's lovely in here. I'll see you in the morning, OK?
OK, bye.
Bye.
What a day. Built this shed in a day. The roof and the walls are insulating really well, keeping the heat in, and that wood stove is kicking the heat out. It's so hot. I'm in for a great night. No sleeping bag, just the fire.
As the boys bed down for the night, we've attached a thermal lens to our camera to check out which shed has the best insulation. At first glance, Johnny's high-tech shed looks pretty good. His only hotspot appears to be near his nightlight. Richard's low-tech insulation looks good at the back, but come round the side and it's obvious where he's missed the straw bales. But then again, his stove is pumping out an awful lot of heat.
I'm out of power.
Oh, cool, Rich.
Johnny?
Rich? I've run out of power, mate. You haven't got room for a small one, have you?
Oh, you can always come round here, mate. It's lovely. OK, we've survived a night in the sheds. Now it's time for the last test. It's the pressure test.
And this is going to be interesting because it's going to test which shed is more airtight and therefore less drafty.
And I'm going to win.
We'll see.
Over to you, Peter.
The pressure test is something that all new houses in England and Wales have to pass to comply with the latest regulations. The engineer uses powerful fans to suck air out and create a pressure drop within the building. The better the seal, the bigger the drop. And although both sheds were considered to be very leaky, there was a definite winner.
OK, Peter, what's the verdict?
Well, gentlemen, the winner is the low-tech.
Yes!
Yes!
All right, fair play, mate. You win the pressure test. Well
Cheers,
done.
mate. Thanks.
But tell you what, aren't you worried about all that horse manure breaking down and giving off loads of methane inside your shed?
I'd only be worried if there was a naked flame in there.
Right, so you put the wood-burning stove out then?
No. No, I didn't.
Oh!
Still to come, Richard and Johnny track down a legendary British inventor who was passionate about renewable energy long before it was fashionable. And the boys attempt to run a home cinema by riding bicycles. Earlier, we saw how environmentally friendly power is being produced using the sun, the wind and the waves. But there's one major source of totally sustainable power that we haven't yet touched, and that's the human body.
The next big thing could be something called energy harvesting, which is converting movement in the world around us into electricity.
So, in theory, you could take the vibrations made by hundreds of commuters running across a platform and convert that movement into power.
And what about soldiers marching up and down and running around doing all that training? They could have devices fitted into their boots that would convert some of that motion into useful electricity. Sounds far-fetched. Well, the American military are already working on it.
Or how about traffic lights powered by cars running over speed bumps?
However, some of these technologies are in the early stages of development, but the possibilities are endless.
On the other hand, more direct human-powered electrical equipment is already available. So who better to visit than Trevor Bayliss, the world-famous inventor of the wind-up radio?
Trevor, it's an honour to meet you. And
Likewise, Trevor.
your name will always be synonymous with wind-up technologies.
Can you believe this, eh?
Could you talk us through how it all started?
Well, it was pure chance, you know, watching a programme about the spread of HIV/AIDS in Africa. Then I heard that, in fact, most of Africa doesn't have electricity. The only other form of electricity was in the form of batteries, which were horrendously expensive. And so now I'm thinking there, and I can see myself in colonial Africa, right? I'm wearing a pith helmet, I've got a gin and tonic in my left hand, and I'm listening to some raunchy number on my wind-up gramophone.
Oh,
right?
yeah, Trevor, I'm with you.
Yeah, I'm enjoying
And
this.
now I'm thinking to myself, now, hang on, Trev. If you can get all that noise by dragging a rusty nail around a piece of old Bakelite using a spring, surely there must be enough power in that spring to drive a radio.
So what he did was, he took a DC motor like this one, attached it to a hand drill in a vise, because when you wind a DC motor in reverse, it becomes a dynamo, producing an electric current.
So for demonstration, we've attached it to a light bulb here, so when Johnny cranks that handle, it should produce enough power to light it. Go on, mate, go on.
Bingo, it's working.
So it works with a bulb. Now let's see if the boys can wire their hand-cranked dyno to a radio and get that bursting into life. While Johnny rests his spinning arm, Richard does the soldering.
And once he'd got it connected, Trevor knew that if he could generate even a small bark of sound from his radio, he could realise his dream of producing the world's first wind-up radio.
Good luck, mate.
Right, here we go.
Yes!
That is working.
Having proved the theory, all Trevor had to do was find a suitable spring to first store and then slowly release that hand-cranked power. And the rest, as they say, is history.
So this got us thinking, if it's possible to build a human-powered radio, what about a human-powered television?
or even a human-powered home cinema system.
Now that's a great idea.
The only problem with running a home cinema like this is you need a steady 250 watts, and that's serious power. It's fortunate then that the boys have got some serious kit to help them out.
So, we've got two mountain bikes here, driving this roller and via these pulleys, this car alternator. Now this produces 12 volts DC, but we need 240 volts AC. So, before getting to the projector, it goes through this AC-DC inverter. Now this alternator is capable of producing half a kilowatt, that's 500 watts. And the projector needs 250 watts, so in theory we're laughing. However, it all depends on Richard and I being able to generate that amount of energy, which, looking at us, is debatable.
Now this is the big one. Johnny, you ready?
I think so.
You steady?
Sort of.
Okay, let's go.
All right, nice and steady then.
Now this is a much tougher task than the boys first thought. To get the projector bulb to light up, they need to keep pumping out a steady 250 watts worth of power for at least 10 seconds. This might not sound much, but believe me, it isn't easy.
The light's on. Oh, it's on.
Brilliant, it's working!
Come on, lads, put your backs into it. Come
on, you can do it!
That's it. See what you can achieve when you put your mind to it?
See you next time.
Breathe. Oh, no lessons.
That's all from this green special. Join Richard and Johnny again soon for more fascinating facts and revelations.
Was I seeing things?
No, it works, it works.
Right. Graham, it's on fire.
Keep pulling, keep pulling, keep pulling, keep pulling, and cut there.